My parents gave my entire college fund to my older sister because she was the one with real potential. They told me to figure life out on my own. 22 years later, they showed up at my front door with suitcases because the daughter they sacrificed everything for had just sold their house without telling them. I was 16 the first time I realized my parents had already decided which child mattered more. Her name was Emily. She was 3 years older than me, and in my parents' eyes, she could do no wrong. If Emily got a B, they blamed the teacher. If I got an A, they asked why it wasn't an A plus. That was just how life worked in our house. At least that's what I believed back then. My parents weren't rich. Dad worked as a mechanic. Mom was a receptionist at a dentist's office. Money was always tight, but every month they quietly put money into two college savings accounts. One for Emily. One for me. Or so they said. Whenever I asked about college, Dad would smile. Don't worry, we're taking care of it. I believed him. I shouldn't have. Emily graduated high school first. She wanted to attend a private university nearly 6 hours away. The tuition was insane. Dad didn't hesitate. We'll make it work. Mom nodded. Double quotes. Our daughter deserves every opportunity. They emptied her college account. Then took out loans. Then refinanced the house. Still, it wasn't enough. One evening, I accidentally overheard them talking in the kitchen. Dad sounded worried. We're still short almost $40,000. Mom didn't answer for several seconds. Then she quietly said, "We still have Jacob's fund." I froze. Dad sighed. He'll understand. My heart dropped. The next morning, Dad sat me down. We need to have a conversation. I already knew. He folded his hands together. Your sister has an incredible opportunity. I didn't say anything. We're moving your college savings to help her finish school. I stared at him. All of it. Mom smiled like she was asking me to pass the salt. You can always get scholarships. Dad added, or work while you're in school. Emily deserves this more. Those 4 words hit harder than anything else. I looked at my parents. So what about me? Dad shrugged. You'll figure something out. That was it. Years of savings. Gone. In less than 5 minutes. Without anyone asking what I wanted. Emily graduated 2 years later. My parents threw her a huge party. Nearly everyone in the family came. Dad gave a speech about how proud he was. Mom cried. Emily thanked them for believing in her. Nobody mentioned whose future had paid for that diploma. Meanwhile, I worked jobs, construction during the day, warehouse shifts at night. I took community college classes whenever I could afford them. Sometimes I slept for hours a night. Sometimes less. Not once did my parents ask how I was paying tuition. Not once did they offer to help. Every phone call was about Emily. Emily got promoted. Emily bought a new car. Emily's traveling to Europe. Emily's boyfriend is a lawyer. Eventually, I stopped calling. They barely noticed. Years passed. I started a small home renovation business with 1 pickup truck and borrowed tools. The first year was brutal. The second wasn't much better, but slowly. Customers came back. Then they brought friends. Before long, I had employees, then crews, then contracts. Within 15 years, the company I'd built from nothing was doing projects all over the state. I never became famous, but I became comfortable. More importantly, I never had to ask anyone for help again. One afternoon, I received an invitation, Emily's 50th birthday party. At my parents' house. I almost threw it away. Instead, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I went. The moment I walked through the front door, Mom hugged me like nothing had ever happened. Dad smiled. Look who finally showed up. Emily barely looked up from her phone. Then she laughed. So, still remodeling kitchens. I smiled politely. Among other things, she smirked. I guess somebody has to do the manual labor. The room laughed. Even my parents. I didn't. Because sitting in the driveway was a brand new luxury SUV with a giant red bow on the hood. Dad proudly announced. We bought it for Emily. I looked at the price tag hanging from the mirror. Then at the mortgage papers sitting on the kitchen counter. And I realized that my parents still hadn't learned their lesson. Asterisk, I couldn't stop staring at the SUV. It easily cost more than my first 3 work trucks combined. Emily noticed. She smiled. Nice, isn't it? Dad puffed out his chest. It's the least we could do. Mom nodded proudly. Emily's worked so hard. I almost laughed. Instead, I quietly asked, "Did you pay cash?" Dad hesitated. "No, we refinanced." Again, something about the way he answered bothered me. Their mortgage had already been refinanced years earlier to pay for Emily's college. Now, they'd done it again, for a car. I looked at Mom. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Emily rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. The lecture." Dad frowned. "We didn't ask for financial advice. I know. I'm just asking." Emily laughed. "Relax. I'll help them if they ever need it." Those words would come back to haunt her. Dinner was awkward. Every conversation somehow turned back to Emily, her promotion, her vacations, her investment portfolio, her new lake house, her expensive wine collection. I mostly stayed quiet, not because I was intimidated, because I simply didn't care anymore. Toward the end of the evening, Dad looked at me. "So, how's your little business?" Little. After 20 years, he still called it my little business. I smiled. "It's doing well, busy." "Very." Emily smirked. "You still swing a hammer." Sometimes she laughed. "I'd die if I had to do physical work." I shrugged. "I don't have to." "What do you mean?" "I have project managers and site supervisors and office staff." The smile slowly disappeared from her face. Dad looked surprised. "How many employees do you have now?" I took a sip of water. "Last month, 48. Silence. Mom blinked. 48. I nodded. Emily forced a smile. "Well, I still make more." Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. It honestly didn't matter. Before I left, Dad pulled me aside. I know things weren't always fair. That caught me off guard. For a second, I thought he was finally going to apologize. Instead, he said, "But everything worked out." I stared at him. "Did it?" "You own a business. Emily has a great career. See, it all worked out. No apology. No acknowledgement, nothing." I drove home that night feeling strangely empty. Not angry, just finished. I finally accepted something I'd avoided admitting for years. They were never going to understand what they'd done. Another 3 years passed. Business continued growing. We expanded into commercial renovations, opened a second office, bought a warehouse. Life was good, busy, peaceful. My parents almost never called. Birthdays, Christmas, that was about it. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. "Mom," I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Hello." She sounded cheerful, too cheerful. "Hi, sweetheart." I hadn't heard her call me that in years. "Everything okay?" Oh, yes. "We just wanted to see you." I frowned. "Why, no reason. We miss you." That was new. 2 days later, they came over for dinner. Dad looked older, much older. Mom seemed nervous. Neither of them mentioned Emily, not once. That alone told me something was wrong. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "We've been thinking." I waited. "You've always been responsible." Mom quickly nodded. "So responsible." Dad continued. "We're getting older, I guess. We've decided to simplify things." "What does that mean?" Mom smiled. "We signed the house over to Emily." I nearly dropped my fork. "You what?" Dad waved his hand. "Don't worry. She promised we'd always have a place to live." Mom added, "It'll make probate easier." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "The house is your biggest asset?" Dad nodded. "Exactly. So now it's hers." I leaned back. "Did you talk to a lawyer?" Emily's name had somehow become the answer to every question. Dad smiled. "Emily handled everything." I wanted to say something, anything, but after everything that had happened, I simply nodded. "If that's what you want." Dad smiled. "It is." As they left, I watched them drive away. For some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed the biggest mistake of their lives. 6 months later, at exactly 6:42 on a rainy Sunday morning, someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. When I opened it, my parents were standing there, soaked from the rain, each holding a suitcase. Mom was crying. Dad looked completely broken. The first words out of his mouth were, "Emily sold the house?" For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood him. "What do you mean? She sold the house?" Dad stared at the floor. "She sold it." Mom covered her face with both hands. "She didn't tell us." I looked from one to the other. "The house you signed over to her?" Dad nodded slowly. "Yes." I stepped aside. "Come in." Neither of them spoke as they walked into my living room. Their clothes were soaked. Their suitcases looked old, like they'd been packed in a hurry. I handed them towels. Mom couldn't stop crying. Finally, Dad took a deep breath. "About 4 months ago, Emily said someone offered an unbelievable price." I folded my arms and she said we'd all benefit. Dad explained that Emily had convinced them the market was at its peak. She promised she'd buy another house, one with a small guest suite. "You'll live with us," she told them. "It'll be even better." So they trusted her. Again, the sale closed 6 weeks later. Emily collected every dollar. After paying off the remaining mortgage, she walked away with nearly $800,000. Not 1 cent belonged to my parents anymore, because legally, the house had been hers. What happened next? Dad looked embarrassed. "She said the new house wasn't ready, so we stayed at a hotel for 2 weeks." Mom quietly added. "Then another week. Then another." I already knew where this was going. Finally, Emily called. Dad pulled out his phone. I still have the message. He handed it to me. I read it silently. "Mom, Dad, Mark accepted a job in Arizona. We're moving next month. I wired you enough money for another week at the hotel. After that, I think it's time you start looking at senior apartments. Love you." I looked up. "That's it." Dad nodded. She stopped answering. Mom whispered, "She blocked us." The room became completely silent. For years, I'd imagined what this moment might feel like. I thought I'd be satisfied, maybe even happy. Instead, I just felt tired. Dad looked at me. We didn't know where else to go. Mom reached for my hand. "I know we don't deserve your help." There it was, the first honest sentence I'd heard from either of them in years. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, poured 3 cups of coffee. When I came back, Dad was staring at one of the family photos on my wall. Not of us, of my employees at our annual company picnic. "You built all this yourself?" I nodded. "Yes." He smiled sadly. "I never realized I couldn't stop myself." "You never asked." Neither of them argued, because they knew it was true. Over the next hour, I learned the rest. Emily hadn't just sold the house. She'd emptied nearly every account my parents had shared with her. The joint savings, gone. The emergency fund, gone. Even Dad's antique tool collection, sold online while they were staying in the hotel. "How much do you have left?" Dad looked ashamed. He opened his wallet. Inside, $43. Mom quietly placed an envelope on the table. "These are all our papers, bank statements, medical insurance, social security information." Everything they still owned fit inside one small envelope. Then Dad looked me straight in the eyes. "I know I have no right to ask, but could we stay here for a few days?" I looked around my house, 5 bedrooms, most of them empty. I could easily say yes, but something stopped me. Not anger, not revenge, something else. I slowly sat back down, then asked the question I'd waited more than 20 years to ask. "When you gave my college fund to Emily, did you ever think about what would happen to me?" Neither of them answered. Because for the first time, They were finally sitting exactly where I'd been all those years ago, waiting for someone else. To decide whether they mattered, asterisk neither of them answered. Dad stared into his coffee. Mom couldn't even look at me. The silence lasted nearly a minute. Finally, Dad spoke. I thought. He stopped, then tried again. I thought you'd be okay. I couldn't help laughing, not because it was funny, because I'd heard those words before. You'll figure something out. I repeated them slowly. Dad closed his eyes. I remember. I do too. Mom finally whispered. We were wrong. I looked at her. Wrong. She nodded. Double quotes. We convinced ourselves that helping Emily was an investment. We thought she'd always take care of us. And we assumed you didn't need anyone. I leaned back in my chair. You assumed because I never complained. Dad nodded. Double quotes. Yes. That wasn't strength. It was survival. Neither of them argued. After another long silence, I stood up. Come with me. They followed me downstairs. To my home office. On one wall. Hung dozens of framed photographs. My first pickup truck. The tiny storage unit I rented as an office. The first employee I hired. The first commercial project. Every milestone. Every year. Dad slowly walked toward one picture. It showed me standing beside an old pickup covered in company magnets. You still had this. I bought that truck for $1,200. He smiled faintly. It barely ran. I know. I slept in it twice. Dad looked at me. What? I nodded. When I couldn't afford rent. Mom covered her mouth. You never told us. You never asked. Those 4 words hit harder this time. I opened a filing cabinet, pulled out an old folder, yellowed with H. Inside. Were copies of my college applications. Scholarship rejection letters, student loan paperwork. Pay stubs. Everything. I handed the folder to Dad. Read the date. He looked down. September 14. The same week. They transferred my college fund to Emily. Dad flipped through the pages. One receipt caught his attention. Community college tuition. Paid in cash. Another. Textbooks. Another. Night classes. Every payment had my name on it. No one else. Single quotes s. Mom quietly asked, why did you keep all of this? I shrugged to remind myself of what? That nobody was coming to save me. She started crying again. Real tears this time. Not because of Emily. Because she was finally seeing what my life had actually looked like. Dad sat down heavily. I failed you. I looked at him. He'd never admitted that before, not once. I failed as your father. The room stayed quiet. Then he whispered, I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. There were no speeches. No excuses. Just 2 simple words. 22 years late. I believed he meant them. But something inside me had changed too much over the years. An apology couldn't give me back my 20s. It couldn't erase the nights I slept in my truck. Or the years I worked 70-hour weeks just to stay afloat. Some things can't be undone. Dad looked up again. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. He swallowed hard. I wanted you to know. If I could go back, I'd choose differently. For the first time, I believed him. I walked to the guest room. Open the door. It's made up. Mom looked confused. You can stay. She immediately started crying again. Dad stood there silently, then asked, for how long? I thought about it. As long as you need. But there are going to be rules. He nodded immediately. Anything. I looked both of them in the eyes. First, we're going to stop pretending Emily didn't do this. No more making excuses. No more protecting her. If you're living under my roof, we tell the truth. Both of them nodded. Then Dad quietly said something I never expected to hear. I think it's finally time you knew. What really happened to your college fund? My heart skipped a beat. I thought I already knew. Dad slowly shook his head. You only know half of it. I stared at Dad. What do you mean? I only know half of it. He slowly rubbed his face. I've wanted to tell you for years. Then why didn't you? He looked at Mom. Neither of them answered. That silence told me everything. Finally. Dad stood up. I wasn't the one who decided to take your college fund. I frowned. What? I agreed. But I wasn't the one who came up with the idea. I looked at Mom. She immediately burst into tears. It was me. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I convinced your father. The room became completely still. I told him Emily was different. I said she had bigger dreams. I said you were independent. I said ... double quotes she couldn't finish. Dad quietly continued. Your mother believed Emily would become successful enough to take care of all of us. Mom nodded through her tears. I really believed that. I thought ... it was temporary. I thought we'd rebuild your college fund. I asked the obvious question. So why didn't you? Neither of them spoke. Finally, Dad answered. Because every time we started saving again ... double quotes, Emily needed something else first. It was tuition. Then graduate school. Then her wedding. Then the down payment for her first house. Then credit card debt. Then a new SUV. Then the lake house. There was always another emergency. Another excuse. Another promise. Dad looked broken. We kept telling ourselves ... double quotes, this is the last time. It never was. Mom wiped her eyes. The worst part ... what? I stopped thinking of it as your money. She looked directly at me. I started thinking of it as Emily's future. Those words hurt more than I expected. Not because I didn't already know, but because hearing them out loud ... made everything real. Dad quietly walked into the kitchen. When he returned, he carried an old metal lockbox. Rust covered the corners. The handle was scratched. I found this after we moved into the hotel. He placed it on the table. Your mother wanted to throw it away. I couldn't. Inside were old family papers, insurance policies, birth certificates, tax returns. Then, at the very bottom, Dad pulled out a small bank book. The cover was faded. My name was printed across the front. I recognized it immediately. My college account. Dad nodded. I finally looked through it. He opened it carefully. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every balance, recorded by hand. I noticed something strange. The final withdrawal was much larger than I'd expected. I frowned. This isn't right. Dad slowly nodded. It isn't. The account only had about 40,000. So why does this say? I looked again. ... 70-8,000. Mom closed her eyes because she already knew what I was about to realize. I looked at Dad. There was more money. He nodded. A lot more. But ... you told me my account only had 40,000. I lied. The room went silent. Dad couldn't even look at me. For years ... double quotes, I told myself it was to protect you. But the truth is ... I was ashamed. He finally looked me in the eyes. Your grandfather, my dad, he found out what we'd done. My heart skipped. Grandpa knew. Dad nodded. He was furious, apparently. My grandfather had secretly deposited nearly $40,000 into my college account a year before he died. He'd never told me. He'd only told my parents. It was supposed to be a surprise graduation gift. Dad's voice cracked. We took that too. I couldn't speak. My grandfather, the one person who had always believed in me ... had tried to help, and I never even knew. Dad swallowed hard. He never forgave us. What? He changed his will. I stared at him. I thought Grandpa didn't leave much. Dad shook his head. That's what we told everyone. Then he quietly added, the truth is ... double quotes ... he left something specifically for you. I felt my heart pounding. What was it? Dad reached back into the lockbox, pulled out one final sealed envelope. Across the front, in my grandfather's handwriting, were 5 words. Give this to Jacob. It had never been opened. Asterisk for several seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I stared at the envelope, yellowed with age. The seal had never been broken. My grandfather's handwriting looked exactly the way I remembered it, strong, neat, confident. Dad slowly pushed it toward me. I should have given this to you 22 years ago. I looked at him. Why didn't you? He closed his eyes. Because I knew double quotes if you read it double quotes that you'd know exactly what we'd done. My hands were shaking as I carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there was a single handwritten letter and another folded document. I unfolded the letter first. Dear Jacob, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer around to tell you these things myself. I've watched you grow into the hardest working young man I've ever known. People think your sister is the talented one. I don't. Talent comes and goes. Character stays forever. I stopped reading. My eyes filled with tears. I continued. Your parents don't see what I see. Maybe one day they will. Maybe they won't either. Why double quotes never measure your worth by how other people treat you. Some parents choose favorites. That says everything about them and nothing about you. I couldn't hold back anymore. For the first time in years, I cried, not because of my parents, not because of Emily, because someone had believed in me all along. I just never knew it. I unfolded the second document. It was my grandfather's final will. Highlighted in yellow was one paragraph. I leave my grandson Jacob $100,000 to be used only for his education or to start a business. My hands froze. $100,000. I looked at Dad. What happened to it? He swallowed. I challenged the will. What? So did your mother? Mom quietly nodded. We argued that because you were still a minor we should control the money. The judge approved it. The inheritance was placed into the same education account. The very account they emptied. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They hadn't only taken my savings. They had taken my grandfather's final gift. Dad wiped his eyes. I've hated myself ever since. I deserved that. No, he shook his head. I deserved much worse. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside the envelope, then looked at both of them. You can't give me back my 20s. They nodded. You can't give me back Grandpa. Again. They nodded. You can't undo what happened. No. Dad quietly asked, so what happens now? I looked around my house, then at the two people sitting across from me. People who had failed me, but who had finally stopped pretending they hadn't. You can stay. Mom immediately burst into tears. But not because you deserve it. They both looked up. You can stay because Grandpa would have wanted me to become the man he believed I already was. Months passed. They found a small senior apartment not far from my office. I helped them move. Not because they had earned my forgiveness. Because I refused to become the kind of person they had been. Emily called exactly once. She wanted money. Apparently Her marriage had fallen apart. The investments she'd bragged about had failed. Most of the money from selling the house was gone. She acted as if nothing had happened, as if we were simply catching up. When she finally asked, so can you help me out? I smiled, then repeated the exact words I'd heard 22 years earlier. You'll figure something out. Then I hung up. Today, my parents visit every Sunday. Not because they're obligated, because they choose to. Sometimes we have dinner. Sometimes we sit on the porch and say almost nothing. The past isn't forgotten. It never will be. But at least it isn't hidden anymore. Grandpa's letter stays in my office, framed above my desk. Whenever business gets difficult or life feels unfair, I read the last sentence one more time. Character stays forever. He was right. My parents gave my future to my sister, thinking success belonged to the child they invested in. They were wrong, because the greatest investment anyone ever made in me was a single letter from a man who never stopped believing in who I could become.